Hi, everybody. This is Joe Moore, joined by Malin Uthaug, a researcher of psychedelics and much more. Are you a competitive freediver as well? Is that right?
Yes, yes, yes,
Amazing.
yes, I am.
Yeah, I've been watching your progress for a while and been like pretty blown away. I do a little bit of diving. Like I think my first
Mhm.
diving was actually into Hob. And
Really?
like, yeah, yeah. If you really want to spoil yourself, do that. And then you're like, oh, why would I go anywhere
Yeah,
else? Yeah.
exactly. Like
Hmm.
diving anywhere else now, but the hub is like fucking horrible. Like I'm in Italy now and I'm planning to go to Livorno in Tuscany in the weekend just to suss out the area, but I know it's gonna be disappointing.
Yeah. All right. So before we dig into your story, can you give us like a really high level of the paper that came out and we'll dig into it in more detail in a little bit?
Oh, yeah. So it's about this new concept that me and my colleagues introduced to the space, trying to, let's say, extend the current set and setting framework to include also body set, which is defined as the state of the body.
Mm. All right. Brilliant. I love that. And I think it's huge, right? Like we know that from some studies, even an elevated body set or a different body set can really change the cards, even for something like neurosurgery, not even just psychedelics,
Mhm.
a little more subtle, but yeah, even like grosser things like neurosurgery. It helps to be in a much calmer state, turns out. So, all right, let's dig into your backstory and then we can dig into the project around body set. Um,
Sure.
so,
Mhm.
um, you've done a good amount of academic work in psychedelics. You published a bunch, and how did psychedelics come on your radar as something you wanted to research? And I know we've covered this in past
Ah,
episodes. I just want to refresh
maybe,
some
yeah.
folks.
Susie. No, I think it's because I've always been very fascinated about what helps people heal, like what makes people better, what makes people worse. And so, also having had my own experience with PTSD, figuring out how to navigate that when nothing really was working. So, I had to find a different way. So yeah, I think it really comes down to that question, like what helps people heal, and lately also what helps people optimize and also thrive.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that. And like what I recall from some of your earlier work was that you were focused on 5-MeO DMT almost specifically for a while. Is that still the case?
Yeah, like 5-MeO was my baby in the very beginning. It
Hmm.
was very understudied when I started in 2017. So it being my thesis work laid the foundation of where my expertise was residing, and so right now it still is a big passion. We just wrapped up a great project on comparing intramuscular injection with vaporization, so looking at the effects via EG, salivary samples, psychological measures, and other physiological assessments. So we're currently writing up the papers and publishing them soon, hopefully. And yeah, keen to do more work on five and also other things like freediving and breathwork. Mm.
Yeah, brilliant. And I don't actually know that I've told you this yet, but I talk about one of your papers a lot, in terms of like defending toad populations. I want to know if I'm actually wrong or I'm saying it right.
Mm.
So please correct me either way. Um, but what I tell folks is that your study pretty much confirmed that subjective effects of synthetic versus toad-derived 5-MeO DMT are nearly identical. And there was a number of safety items you identified that said synthetic was the safer option. Am I right there?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Any color you could add on that story, or is that kind of the?
I mean, there are several different factors to consider. One is the thing with the toad, and the secretion being its major defense mechanism against predators. So milking it deprives it of that, And so if the toad is then in a dangerous situation, how does it defend itself? So then you could ask, like, is it okay for somebody to trip balls on that secretion at the expense of a species? Because that's how far it actually went in terms of like black market dynamics, with the toads being captured, sold off, and all of these things. Secondly, is the fact that the secretion contains a lot more than 5-MeO-DMT, and there's no way of like controlling for the amount of all of that. So unless you were to do an analysis of that specific flake that is administered to you, you will never know. So it's like a little bit of a gamble, even though we also showed through my work that the primary ingredient is 5-MeO. You can never be fully sure. So when it comes to doing work in a lab where safety is very important, you need to be able to say, like, okay, this is 100% what the patient is getting, and only that. If you can't say that, you can't really use it in a lab setting. So that's why, let's say, the secretion can never be used in a lab in the way that, psychedelic therapy work is being done right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember, like, not only I remember there being a lot of variability in the toad source stuff too, in terms of potency and like other molecules that may or may not be harmful or risky. It's understudied, so we can't really be safe with it.
Yeah.
Are you still pretty up on the 5-MeO-DMT research that's happening?
Other than zoning in on my project the last couple of months, I mean, I've been focusing on writing up the results. I haven't followed too much. So what's new?
Oh, I'm sure there's plenty. I don't follow it as closely as I probably should. I've been hearing case reports of occasional heart attacks in the experience, but I'm not sure how broadly we're seeing that. And I think it's mostly with synthetic, not with like the bufotenin extra from naturally sourced. So it's an interesting one, because I don't hear about this kind of like cardiac risk too often. Like, we had one case ages ago from mushrooms broadly, but it might have been something strange like a Liberty cap over a cubensis. So there's cases, and it's just hard when it's like 1 in a million we're getting a case like that to say what it is.
Yeah. And you don't know, like, let's say the body set of the person, what, I don't know, what factors they had that could have been a problem limitation. So yeah, it's hard to say.
Yeah, cool. So let's like, what was next for you before the body set, or sorry, after this kind of earlier set of papers you were publishing on 5-MeO?
Like, after all the things that I did for my PhD and so on,
Right.
I kind of entered a little phase, I think we all did, after the pandemic. And I was living in Dahab, was working on this naturalistic stuff, which took a little bit of time to get off the ground because of the constrictions with the whole COVID pandemic in the world. And I was freediving a lot in Dahab and working online, and that came with a lot of new inspiration. Let's say freediving has definitely had an effect on me personally and also professionally. I think very much I owe it to Dahab, the community there in freediving, that Body Set was born, and another sorry, I got beetroot in my throat.
All good. If you need a moment, I can tap to this. Yeah, like extreme sports like that, like really pushing your body to the limit, like the mental and body set going into the experience is super important ingredient into if you're going to have success in what you're doing, right? Like, I know that from a lot of my outdoor adventures, and how bad I am at something like scuba diving. It really shows. I'm just like, oh God, here we go. This is either going to be amazing or the absolute worst. And yeah, body set can play a big part of that. And like,
Mm.
how do you define body set?
The state of the body. I think for me, another thing that came out of my time in Dahab was this importance of balance. So work life balance became very important because up until that point, I had been just working a lot and not living too much. So making that shift into playing more, enjoying life more was beautiful, and I'm very glad I did that. And also again, how that just reflected into my work with the body set. There's also this popcorn theory in there, kind of like an analogy explaining it all, how we are all like popcorn kernels, that we need certain things internally and externally in order to pop. And popping can be so many things in terms of like free diving. It could be executing a dive to 80 meters. It could be living your best life in Italy, like I do now, or anything else, like something that makes you radiate, pop, make you happy in a way. And I think
Yeah.
that's possible if you're in a state of balance so that you're ready to action on whatever stressors comes your way, which there is an abundance of in life overall.
Mm. Yeah, I like that. Uh, maybe not a surprise, but I was learning about popcorn on Monday, and it turns
Yeah.
out it's helpful to have 14% humidity inside, um, in
Ah,
order for that thing to happen.
yes.
So there's a certain humidity number they had pinned down.
Exactly. Yeah, I think I mentioned it in the analogy. There's something about the amount of water. If it's too little, too much, it will make or break the pop, right? So that's exactly what I speak to. Like body set is that little
Mm.
percentage of water in the popcorn kernel.
Yeah, I love that. And a specific kind of corn, but that's harder to do an analogy with. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
And all the kernels are different, right? So like is there a way to like modify the humidity within the kernel in a certain way in order to make them all pop beautifully? I mean, it's
right.
just an image to portray the idea. So
Hmm.
it obviously have limitations, but I'm sure it drives the point home anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And so like what were the questions you were asking going into this to get to some specific conclusion?
Mm. When body set started coming on my radar, it really was about what I was doing in my life to improve my dives in the water. So like one of the things we are taught as free divers is that if you eat a lot of cheese, you're gonna have a lot of mucus and you're not gonna be able to equalize as easily because your nose is gonna be blocked, eh? So it really then alerted me to the fact that okay, what I eat will have an impact on my ability to dive and execute on equalization, relaxation, and all of it. And then it went further than that. I was like, huh, what about inflammation, stress levels, all of these things? And I went into this deep rabbit hole of like Google Scholar. I was like, there's something here. And so, yeah, that was the beginning of like a lot of reading. And then just putting the different points together and be like, aha, I see. So there's something here.
Is there, so you looked at a lot of biomarkers then. Is there anything around cortisol? Obviously, one of the things people that aren't in research like myself know a little bit about being the stress hormone. Like, is
Mhm.
there a certain kind of standard range that's like ideal for cortisol? And like, or is everybody different with their cortisol levels? And like kind of like with diabetes, right? You have certain levels that you want
Mm.
to keep in a good range. And otherwise it
Mhm.
can become pathological. Like, is it a similar thing where there's like a tight range before cortisol triggers like a pathological response and or a negative psychedelic
Mm,
response?
I guess it would be. I have no data on it right now, or like we will have from the 5-MeO project. Like we're still
Mm,
doing some analysis on this, but probably I would assume it is. I'm not sure what the cutoff is. But I think there's like probably a range of multiple things that needs to be established via rigorous research now going forward. And it's not only cortisol, like CRP is also important. IL-6 is an indicator of inflammation as well. If that's high, that indicates higher inflammation. If it's lower, it's lower inflammation levels. So this is all part of the next publications with 5-MeO that we're gonna be smashing out.
yeah, that's amazing. And that's good you can measure that stuff. I was chatting with some researchers, I think at Emory, about studying things like Groff style breath work, and they were talking about taking blood and different biomarkers during the workshop. I found that fascinating, and I think it's worth studying. I was just like, that's going to really change the experience in an interesting way to get like drawn on every
Depending on how
30
they
minutes
do
or
it.
something. Right.
Yeah,
Um,
unless they use a cannula, because then like the whole procedure of dissatisfaction is done on beforehand, and of course the needle is in your fucking arm. But if you have to do it during the experience, I think it's a different ballgame.
yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
for sure it will be.
Yeah. So, how many people did you research this with?
So we did now a sample of 16 in each group, so 32 people. So
Great.
16 people with IM and 16 people with vaporization. And so we're considering upping the sample size, provided we secure a grant, which we'll know about soon. Which I think would be amazing, even though I think we have sufficient statistical power to make at least some general assumptions about what's going on. Of course, the more people, the always better. But one of the first studies I did with like biomedical design only had like 11 or 12 participants, I think.
Mm,
And that was very significant results, even in such a low sample.
right. Is there some sort of like if the results are super amazing, even in a small sample, people take it seriously? Or is it like better to have 20 to 30 participants?
I mean, yes and no. Like, it's amazing if it's very significant, but also what happens if you were to replicate it? Would it still be the same, right? So more studies would be needed to confirm it either way. And again, like more people, the better. Oh, your microphone is off.
Don't know how that happened. Yeah. So,
Uh-oh.
so can we, yeah, like, okay, so people come in, you take some samples, assuming beforehand. Did you have them rigged up for biomarkers to take during the experience?
We had them hooked up to an EEG
Hmm.
continuously, and we did saliva samples before and after. I think it would be too disrupting to ask people to chew on a cotton ball in the middle of the experience laying down. And so I would really like to see maybe, blood work in the future where people are, let's say, in a lab, they're hooked up with a cannula, and that way you could draw blood at specific times and suss out what happens at those time points.
Yeah, that's interesting. And what kind of preparation did you do for folks? Like, did you kind of teach them about what the experience might be like a little bit?
So the way that I do studies is naturalistic work, eh? So the
Hmm.
research is one arm, and then the experience is hosted by the facilitators. Everything that they do on a normal basis is what's happening, and we're just coming in to research what's going on. So the facilitator had a certain structure in their container that they were following, and that was some preparatory interviews, conversations, I believe, online or in person before the experience. And I believe that they also informed them what they could experience, but oftentimes we see that the participants in this particular sample had done 5-MeO before. So they kind of knew what they were getting themselves into.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Like, I think a naive person is like really difficult, like to prep on this stuff. I think informed consent gets really complicated around psychedelics in general, and probably 5-MeO maybe specifically. It's like, how, like, you know, let's go an extra level of ineffable up on this thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's interesting. And okay, and what sorry to get super specific, but I'm just kind of like really curious about your process. Like, what kind of device did you use? Was it kind of like a similar vaporization device to what Hopkins would use?
The facilitator used their own vaporizer. This one was a vape pen.
Hmm.
Um, so that had a caliber container with the oil and already prepped.
Hmm. And do you know what the carrier fluid was, like a propylene glycol or something similar, maybe?
I have it written down somewhere, but I don't remember on top of my head right now.
Cool. If we remember, shoot it to me later. I'm curious. And then what kind of dosing do you think they were receiving?
Oh, we have the dosing. It's like I think it was about average like 8 for IM and repeated dosing with vaporization. Wait, I can actually pull up the results just so that I don't say anything wrong.
No, it's all good. I
Yeah, but like
I
let's
think
say in the higher like 8 to 10.
8 to 10 milligrams. Yeah. I get
Yeah.
really um I get confused on the dosing because I, for whatever reason, get it stuck that NN-DMT dosing is the same as 5-MeO dosing, which is very different. Um,
Mm,
yeah, and I've never measured it out for myself, 5-MeO, but
yeah.
certainly
Hmm.
measured out plenty of DMT in my day. And yeah, I think this is a good point to make people out there a little safer. Is 8 to 12 milligrams is a pretty substantial range for a dose, and
I just
most
pulled up
scales.
the sorry. I
Yeah,
just
go
pulled
for it.
up the dose thingy.
Hmm.
IM group on average dose, and they received a single dose of 5-MeO, right?
Hmm.
So it's like 8.75 milligrams. And in the vaporization group, most participants received like 2 doses, some 3 and some 4. So already the difference between IM and vaporization is the fact that you need to repeatedly dose somebody with vaporization. And the average dose, like they started off low, like 2 milligrams for the first, then 6, 7 for the second. Third dose was about 9, 10, and then 8.9 for the fourth dose.
Okay,
Hmm.
cool. I love that. Um, yeah, that's really interesting. I think that's kind of how I experienced it. Was like a low dose vape pen twice plus a medium dose at the third administration. And I
Hmm.
really found that fascinating. I yeah, I think what I was trying to get to was scales that are accurate at the milligram level are a little bit expensive. So people in the underground may or may not be purchasing a scale that's appropriate for that kind of measurement. And I think consumers and like clients might just be really aware of that. Like, how are they administering it? Why do you know the dosing's safe? And things like that are really important questions to ask if you're going to engage with this
Definitely.
stuff. Yeah. And
Absolutely.
a common thing in the toad sourced world is overdosing. Like, a lot of people will just deliberately overdose you so that you got an experience. More so than if it was good or bad, they're worried about did you get it or not. And that's
Yeah.
complicated.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So that's something to be cautious of.
Yeah, cool. And then Did any of your participants have any kind of like adverse events? Did anybody kind of lose it or need a lot of care afterwards or anything like that?
No, I would say like it's very similar to what would happen in any other psychedelic study or something. Of course, there might be, let's say, transient affect coming up, which is easily resolved with integration or care from the facilitator. So they would take on that and navigate it. And of course, like in the questionnaires, and so we were asking them how they were doing 2 days later, 7 days later, and 4 weeks after. And like, let's say the phenomenon of reactivations, the people were aware of the fact that that could happen, and then it only lasted like a couple of days, and then it disappeared, which is very very normal with 5-MeO, I would say, especially with vaporization, because of the
Mm,
overwhelming surprise of the experience in the onset, right?
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Like this is that makes sense. And I think a lot of us have seen at least video of people having a complicated time with movement and things like that under the experience. And um, I thankfully was able to stay really still, which was nice. Maybe I did a couple hand
Yeah.
things, but tremors can happen, all sorts of things can happen. So it could be scary to see. And then after, so people are coming out, and then you take some more blood, I assume, and um, yeah, was there like a standard after protocol that you implemented?
Yeah, like once, so the way that we run it was the facilitator wanted there to only be like, let's say, two researchers in the room together with him and the participant. So that's that was one thing. So so I was sitting in the back room in Canada. I was in the toilet, just sitting there with my little office, and in Prague I was in a different one. But basically what we do, I come in the beginning before the experience starts, and I take the saliva samples, the blood pressure, and all of that, and say I'll be back when you're done. So about an hour after they come back from the experience, then we do another saliva sample. But like I mentioned earlier on, we did keep the cap on, EEG and other electrodes, to measure the physiological responses for the duration of the experience.
Mm-hmm.
Because that was seen as like, it's not as invasive, as asking somebody to chew on a cotton ball or like do a blood draw.
Right. That makes sense. And
Hmm.
I had a good one, just escaped me. So,
Hmm.
like what kind of conclusions did you all land on then after all that data collection?
So some of my colleagues, Jacaloka, Marek, and Jan, they've presented bits and bobs in various locations in the past year or so, depending on where we were at with the data collection. And and the last bit that was completed was the EG. So what I can say is that experientially is very similar, but of course, the length of IM is significant compared to vaporization. In
Like
terms of
double,
physiological,
triple?
I mean, vaporization average 10-20 minutes. I've seen people ride that wave for
Mhm.
45 minutes, which is like an extreme outlier, but is possible. But let's say 15 to 20. You're looking at a 60-minute, 90-minute trip. So it's longer. And that showed to be, yeah, there seems to be like a difference in terms of the brain activity. People under IM were going deeper, let's say, based off of what we see on the EEG. And in terms of like the biomedical effects, it's fairly similar. Like my former paper on the biomedical aspects of 5-MeO showed that there's an increase in cortisol, which indicates that the stress response was activated and that it led to a downregulation in IL-6 and systemic inflammation. We see the same trend for both administration routes.
Yeah.
So now we're going deeper into the data to see what more, because that's just like first analysis, and we'll see what comes out of the next little dig.
Yeah. I love that. Um, and are you doing this with Maastricht? Are you working with a different university for this study?
This study is run with Maastricht University, and I also recently set up my own company, embodying balance. So I'm kind of like running my own little research, yeah, company, just doing what I've already done for the past almost 10 years, but in a container that supports everything I do in a way that, makes it easier for me as somebody who lived in so many countries, and I'm from Norway. Losing that connection and all of it was difficult in terms of taxes, social security. So setting up this company kind of just makes that part of my life easier. And it's also very fun to, I don't know, build in a way a different kind of academia, because I'm still connected to university, but I'm very independent, and I like that.
Yeah, we're a fan of people kind of innovating in ways like how can you participate and still have that independence and not necessarily have to like, you know, I don't, yeah, I'll say it out loud, like play the tenure game. Like, is what I
Yeah,
really want to be in the middle of Ohio for the rest of my life? Like the answer is no. When
yeah.
I was receiving a lot of pressure to get a PhD years and years ago, and I said like I'm not
Mm.
moving to the middle of the United States. Like I ended up doing it, but for mountains. But like I'm not doing
Yeah.
it for like a university town, right? Like it's just not what I want or need, and I knew that.
No.
So
Yeah,
there's
it's
novel
beautiful you've
pathways,
been
right?
there. Yeah. And like for me as well, like when I finished my masters and I started my PhD, I probably said this in another conversation with you or somewhere else, but I told my supervisor, like, okay, I'll do a PhD, but I'm not gonna be in Maastricht. I'm gonna be in Prague and do my thing there, and I just never stopped. Like I worked at Imperial College for some time, but then COVID hit, so I ended up relocating to Egypt, and then all of these new ideas with body set, the popcorn theory, like pivotal physical states came out, and it's like, okay, I don't need to be at a university to be successful or have innovative contributions. Like, actually, there's a benefit in me being elsewhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. You have broader perspectives, new information, all that kind of stuff, and different inspirations. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I love that. Um, and you said popcorn again, so I wanted to bring it back up. So, like this, did you know that in Iowa? Kidding. So, like the idea here, I love this. So you have like a certain number of stimulus going into this formula, and at a certain point, there's like a very rapid state change, right? But like there are some
Mhm.
other, it takes a butterfly a long time to become a butterfly, but sometimes we can just incubate this thing and it just shifts quickly, right, into a
Sick.
new form of being. Like, is there any other kind of description you might add to that kind of like radical state change with this like popcorn notion?
I think in parallel to, like, well, I already mentioned it earlier on, like with body set, like I also thought a lot about the pivotal mental state module of Robin. And I remember even when I worked at Imperial, I was toying with the idea of a somatic equivalent to that theory, or like the construct. And then with all the work with the biomarkers, I started forming an idea of that somatic equivalent more.
we might have a slight internet issue here. Everybody stand by. Yeah, if you have questions, please do post them in the socials you're streaming on. We'll check it out and see if we can't get back to you. This is obviously a really interesting conversation to bring more nuance into, set and setting, like body set being a sub aspect of set. And yeah, this is obviously really, really interesting material. So let's see here. And yeah, I'm going to share Paul out there just shared Malin's website. Oh, here we go. I think we're back. Almost back. Here we go. All right. Hi, welcome back.
Sorry. Thank you.
All good.
So what was the last thing you guys heard before I left accidentally?
I think we were chatting about like some nuance to this like state change concept.
Yeah. So I think I started talking about the pivotal mental state model, which explains transformation, psychological transformation, and how this can drive behavioral change. One of the problems I had with that is that it only talks about the psychological aspects, whereas with psychedelics, we see it has a systemic effect. It activates the stress response and all of these things, and it has immune modulatory potential. And so in my head, I was like, maybe there's a somatic equivalent to this. So at the moment, me and my colleagues at Maastricht University and also in Oslo, Attila Sabo, we have Jack Alok on the team, Martha Haveneth. We're wrapping up a paper now on this. So like the pivotal physical state module, and kind of stating that there's probably two ways of an upgrade. So somatic upgrade and psychological upgrade.
That's interesting. And we've been chatting a little bit, like we just saw that paper somewhat recently on immunomodulatory effects. Like, have you looked much into that? Like, did you see anything that would suggest immunomodulatory response in some of your research subjects?
Well, we did see the same trend as I illustrated in my previous work for my PhD, that there's an increase in cortisol and downregulation and IL-6, the inflammatory marker. And we're awaiting some results on epigenetics. So fingers crossed.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. Okay. And like, what do you like, just as of right now, for let's say for psychedelic research, because we're not doing it super clinically yet, like what kind of insights or practices speculatively, like we can't say with conclusive yet, but like what might people be interested in looking at in terms of like what should I change around body set to get what result in like a clinical trial?
I think there's a lot of probably inspiration to be found in the whole ritual around ayahuasca. Not only the ceremony itself, but like the way that things are done prior. And like we see all these like preparatory practices occurring not only with ayahuasca, but like there are flavors of it prior to breath work, prior to 5-MeO. So people kind of pick and choose. And so there are probably some difference between the different facilitators, what they prefer, what their own experiences are, and all of these things. I think that, there's no such thing as one size fits all. So people need to figure out what works for them. And it's very similar when you think of like free diving, because there everybody has their own little ritual of what works in terms of like breathing up before a dive, or like how to act before a competition and before a competition dive. So this is where the whole idea kind of came from, like the freediving world, and how people prepare for not only a peak performance on the big blue, but also in psychedelics, like peak experience.
Yep, I love that. And I think, yeah, people should really be paying attention to this kind of work and hopefully learning a bunch from it. So Do you have any new kind of research projects you're working on that aren't really, you know, so early you can't talk about them?
I have a new study coming up in 2 weeks. So this time it's not psychedelics, but it's on freediving and the effect on the mind and the body. So we're
Mm,
going to run some biomarker assessments there and suss out how freediving can alter consciousness.
that's really interesting. Do you expect anything like MEQ wise, or like what are kind of some of the changes or states you're expecting to see?
I did a previous survey a couple of years ago on freediving. We haven't really published the results yet, but uh, interestingly, it showed very high scores of mystical experiences, which doesn't really
Mm,
blow my mind too much because been there, done that, and many of my friends or people that I know in the network, freediving network, report a lot of psychedelic esque experiences. So it's very interesting how that happens, and I wonder how it does happen, right? And
mhm,
there there might be something about like the common denominator between, let's say, psychedelics and freediving is that they're both stressor for the system, and it alters one's experience in one way or the other, like different mechanisms. With breath holding it's different to what happens with psychedelics, but there's something there, and there's been this long standing, I don't know, anecdotal belief that there might be something about endogenous release of DMT when people are diving. So let's see if that's the case or not. Other people blame, let's say, they experience narcosis, becoming narked, and so that could create hallucinations. So there's a lot of these possibilities, explanations for what makes people have psychedelic experiences at depth.
mm. Yeah, I have you run into David Glowacki at all? He's an American researcher out of Portugal, right, or Spain, I think, right now. He was doing the
Mm,
Clear Light VR app that was triggering substantial MEQ scores for terminally ill folks. Yeah,
mm.
I can share some info about that with you later. But in his VR
Sick.
app, they were getting um, results, MEQ scores sometimes higher than psychedelic sessions without drugs, just in VR.
Yeah.
And like to me, what that did was sort of suggest that the mystical experiencer scores on something like an MEQ, which MEQ has plenty of problems, but like
Mm.
the idea that things that feel mystical, like things rated on MEQ, are somewhat common in humans.
Yeah.
Like it's not wildly rare, right?
No, no, no. And I'm sure many other people have had a mystical experience and they just don't know what it is. And
Mm-hmm.
like, I don't know if I said it, but like that earlier survey that we did, I just had an ADHD kick one day and I was like, I'm gonna compare freediving MEQ to 5-MeO MEQ. Freediving was way higher.
Oh man, that's wild.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah, so most of my transcendence comes not from drugs, which I try to make sure I do enough, but I try to also make sure I get outside and engage and like, I try to have some of those practices and it's sober. Like the sober brain is also quite interesting and we can do a lot of
Yeah.
things without drugs, and I I think what that does is helps us demystify or like take a little bit of the exotic out of psychedelics. Like psychedelics can make these things happen in a pretty immediate way, but we can get there in many,
Yeah.
many other ways, right?
Exactly. Like freediving did it for me, like meditation, vipassana. Even like now I'm not able to dive here in Rimini because there's not really that good of an ocean, and I think having lived in Dahab, it doesn't get any better than that. But I'm training static, which is just dry breath holds and in the pool.
Hmm.
And just being in that stillness, container of stillness, of nothingness, is also very powerful. So like the buildup of CO2 when I do static breath hold compared to like free diving has been super interesting. Very, very interesting, to the point of which I'm like, I have had hallucinations, very intense, and even hearing voices, and like backups or like um, behind the scenes story is that I lost my grandmother a year ago, and so in the space of holding my breath, it's like I can be with her and I can hear her. So it's quite profound. Your mic is off.
Oh, I'm really fast with the mouse today. Yeah. So, like the ability for you to have that kind of experience, in a really interesting, quiet environment, like that kind of mimics a lot of the, um, best I can tell, kind of religious experiences, like isolation and extreme conditions,
Yeah.
can really help instantiate things. Like we're hearing more and more about people like doing a week in the cave in the dark, but like
Sick.
there's other ways to get really, really quiet, um, experiences. Like, and I know for a number of ADHD people, I know, when they scuba dive, stuff becomes really quiet.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you can actually
Yeah.
be still. And I imagine similar in free diving. Actually, can you describe what free diving is? I don't know that everybody understands what this is. It's not like
Yeah.
it's
So
baseball or something.
freediving, I guess many people are known to what scuba diving is, which is
Hmm.
diving with an oxygen tank. Freediving is diving on your own machinery. So a single breath, whatever you can put into your lungs is what you're gonna ride with. So it's I would say it's rather new sport, extreme sport, even though it's been around for some time and it's
Hmm.
only gaining more popularity now, I would say, but still. So people are saying that scuba diving is diving to look outside, but free diving is diving to look within.
Mm, that's really interesting because you have to pay so much attention to your body and a number of those things so you don't get stuck underwater, right? Like scuba, you just look at your little gauge once in a while. You're like, oh, okay, cool, go up.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Yeah, because anything you do burns oxygen. Like you need to be very centered. You have to be very calm because if you start stressing, if you're okay, so anxiety is a normal part and maybe fear as well to some extent. But with free diving, you learn to control it and not be consumed by it. So it's like a delicate balance of okay, this is happening and this is scary or anxiety provoking, but still you can remain calm and centered in the discomfort that is arising. So it's
Mm.
like stress management.
Hmm.
And also like with freediving, because you need to be calm and centered and there is no oxygen tank, right? You can't afford to just splurge on the oxygen that you have. And when you are down there, when you're diving, stillness, there's no distractions, you know, because it's just a line and the big blue unless you're really close to the bottom. But still, the focus point is the line or just closing the eyes.
Yeah, I love
It's
that.
very meditative.
So you must have learned a ton about breath work then over the past period of time as well. Like, is there, and I didn't expect to go in a breathwork direction with you, but I should have expected it given your freediving. So, like, we're seeing a gigantic explosion in breathwork interest, in the psychedelic space and just the general wellness space. People are talking a lot more about it. I got interested via holotropic breath work, but then all sorts of other breath work became popular. Wim Hof is probably way more popular than holotropic breath work because you can do it at home. And very different, right? Holotropic breath work didn't explicitly ask you to do holds. Wim Hof does, which I find really interesting. And then yeah, actually, I only know some of the entry level material for Wim Hof. I don't know the whole thing, despite my membership there. But how do we want to think about like the different types of breathing and holds? Like, are there things we know get shifted with different types of breathing?
Well, you can control your nervous system by the way that you breathe, right? So calmer, like longer exhales has a very soothing impact on the nervous system, and like hyperventilation tends to excite the system more. And there are various ways of doing breath work. Like when you hyperventilate, you oxygenize your brain a lot, so that like the oxygen levels goes up a lot, and people can get DC high and DC things like this. And of course, like with when you lower oxygen levels, CO2 rises. So these can be a little bit anxiety inducing, and then it kind of is about managing that discomfort in a similar way as like with free diving, because the same thing applies there. Like CO2 levels goes up, and so you have the urge to breathe. But the thing that people probably are not really aware of, and like what we're taught in freediving, is like, okay, there is a point you reach once you get the breath hunger, but you can still go, like you still have time. It's not until you start hearing ringing or other physical shifts that are more noticeable that you should start becoming a little bit more alarmed. Because, yeah, the breath hunger is just signaling that, okay, CO2 levels are rising. We can go a little bit more. This is completely normal. And there's a lot more reserve than we actually think. So I think the bit is very psychological, and once you learn to, handle that discomfort and extend that window, there's a lot of power in that.
That's brilliant. Yeah. And the DMT question, a lot of people talk about endogenous DMT release with breath work. My position is that we don't really know enough to say that that's for sure happening. And I don't know, like, have you looked into that data at all around breathwork and endogenous DMT exposure to the rest of the body?
I have thought about it, and I also heard people talk about like that endogenous DMT release, and in those settings, I've been like, hey, we don't know that yet, so maybe don't spread that gospel. I would be interested in sussing out endogenous DMT release in various technologies, be it with breathwork or freediving or anything like that. I think it would be really cool to understand if that is a thing or not.
Do you know if it would require some sort of tap into cerebral spinal fluid to measure that in the brain?
Yeah, from like what I've spoken like about with my colleagues, there would be, let's say, there's a motivation to go in that direction, but it's spinal fluid is a different ballgame. Like it's hard enough to get ethical approval for blood these days, so imagine spinal fluid.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's what I've chatted with most researchers about. It's just, it seems like a very difficult thing to get approval for. I was chatting with somebody just this past weekend about it, who apparently there's a researcher at Harvard who has a decent amount of data on and frameworks around testing cerebral spinal fluid. I'll try to remember to get the researcher's name. Yeah, but you know how it goes
That
when
could be
people
cool
are
if there are different
festivals.
like yeah. I mean, it would be very cool if if that person knows of, I don't know if there's any uninvasive ways to get something. Not sure.
I don't think so. But you got a congratulations here on extending the concept of
Oh,
setting.
thank you, Paul. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
And I
Yay.
think that's right. Like you did contribute to extending this concept. Like Zach Leary the other day, I was chatting with him and he was suggesting sustainability as an extension on setting.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, there's a couple other people proposing other additions. So I love this because it was such a small
Yeah.
group doing this at the beginning. And now we have, thankfully,
Mm.
a growingly diverse scene of people
Yeah.
contributing and like what do we add and for what populations do we add things, because I think it's totally the case that not everything's universalizable, right? Like different populations
Mm.
are going to want different things.
Absolutely. And well, for sure, we all have a couple of things in common, and that is we have a brain and we have a body, a system. So that is one that goes
Hmm.
in for sure. Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes I'm surprised I have a brain, but I do. I do. I'm real.
Or do you? Like, do we? What is this? Like, is this real? Like, yeah, if you want to go
Yeah.
really deep down the rabbit hole, it's like,
Hmm.
hmm.
Absolutely. So, we got a handful of minutes here left. Like, what else has been going on for you that would be interesting to share with folks?
Mm,
You want to talk about beetroot juice?
yeah. This is not wine, guys. Although it looks like it. It's beetroot because supposedly it's gonna help me hold my breath more. Because I'm doing this breath work or not like static apnea training, and so experimenting with different supplements that tweaks my body set and maybe helps my performance. So that's something I'm excited about these days, and doing a lot of ice baths because static alone isn't enough. I need to make it even more extreme.
Yeah, I love that. I No, and I'm with you. Like, right? Like, there's this idea. Have you heard of this concept, the infinite game? Like,
Maybe.
so the idea is that, like, in some games, there's a very discrete end, and
Yeah.
um, in life, or maybe existence, like we can't really
Mm.
say human lifespan is infinite, but we can say that perhaps there's other things that we might be part of. But there's no real distinct end for when are you good enough at violin or free diving or skiing or whatever it
Yeah.
is, or being the best therapist or coach you can be. There's no real end, and I think like you're playing in that, and I think playing in that is like indicative of some sort of flow. Um,
Yeah, like one thing that comes up for me when you say that is this idea of like, okay, when I get there, this is gonna happen, or like when I achieve this or that, or this happens to me, everything's gonna be magically awesome. And sorry, I'm just running out of battery, so I'm just gonna switch
yeah, all
over
good.
here. But basically, what I've learned with the whole freediving aspect, and now also static apnea and like doing static in an ice bath, is not so much about like the minutes that I hit or the depth. Is about who I'm becoming in the process, which is far more interesting, at least to me. And it wasn't always like that. I think everybody at some point or to some extent can be focused on these like milestones, and goals are important because have motivation and you have some sort of direction. But especially the last year has really been about like, who do I become when I do this? Who am I now compared to before I started working on that goal?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And yeah, there is like this self-discovery process as part of it. And I think that's helpful. And
Yeah. And
you
that
know,
will always be there, I
mm-hmm.
think. And then it's
Yeah.
for me, I see life as a game in a way, like different chapters, different adventures, different activities, different people experiences are a way to unlock new parts about me, who I am, what I do, what I'm driven by, and all these things, and obviously also to teach myself about new things, learn. That's so I do it. I love learning and exploring, experiencing. So I think that's gonna be a very infinite game for sure.
Amazing. Amazing. And yeah, like a classic axiom of Western culture coming from the Temple of Apollo at Delphi is know thyself. And unless we're kind
Mm.
of inquiring and pushing in some places, like there's certain things we don't know about ourselves. Like how long
Yeah,
can you hold your breath?
exactly. Or you might just believe certain things about yourself based around what people around you are doing, like the culture that you grew up in, or like things like this. I think my life prior to Egypt was very different compared to what it's now, and like the what I believe about myself and my capacities. I think Egypt's Dahab for me was very much a chapter of hardcore adventure and challenges, because like freediving was one thing of it, but the environment is so extreme. Like it's not only in the middle of the desert, it's hot. Food is a gamble with amoeba parasite risks. So like it's very high risk environment, but in that space you learn how to navigate it, how to thrive, and how to use it to your advantage to grow.
Yeah.
So now it's shifted a bit because I mentioned earlier on I'm now in Italy, and I've been here for 2 months, and I made that call to leave Dahab at least for a period of time, mostly because I got sick from amoebas and parasites. And
Mm,
if I'm going to be talking about the importance of body set in terms of peak experiences and peak performance, I couldn't continue being in an environment where I was getting sick and my work was not as good because I didn't have the energy, or like, and like I couldn't dive properly to in the way that I wanted, in the way that I knew that I could perform if I had the right conditions around me.
hmm. Great. And all right. Well, maybe that's it. So thank you so
Yeah.
much. And Paul put your website up here for people to check out
Thank you,
if
Paul.
they want to check out your work. Please do. What's the name of your company again?
And balance.
Like
It's a
Embodied
word I
Balance.
created. Embodying balance. Yeah, that's what it means.
I love that. All right. Well,
Mm,
Malin, thank you so much for being here with us.
thank you.
Please keep doing the great work. It sounds like you're going to keep it up. So I love that. And yeah, looking forward to more.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on again. Always good to be here.
Absolutely. Thank you.